Good morning, everyone. We are starting today with Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, Book 10, Discourse 51, which is entitled King Mutukunda Glorifies the Lord. So we had just ended with the siege of Mathura by Kalayavana and his armies. Krishna had just evacuated the population of the city of Mathura to a mysterious new city that he just commissioned from Vishvakarma Deva by teleporting them all there. And we haven't even yet been told exactly where it is. Well, Krishna walked out of the city gate of Mathura by himself. Sri Shuka began again. The Yavana, Kala Yavana, beheld Sri Krishna fully emerged from the city gate like the rising moon, most charming to look at, dark of hue, clad in yellow silk, with a white curl of hair on his bosom, and his neck adorned with the brilliant Kaustubha gem, endowed with 4 massive and long arms, so clearly taking his more divine form here, and eyes ruddy as a fresh blown lotus, and wearing a lotus-like face, ever full of excessive joy, with beautiful and splendid cheeks and a bright smile, and adorned with brilliant crocodile-shaped earrings. Concluding from the characteristics pointed out by Narada that this most handsome man with 4 arms and lotus-like eyes, and distinguished with the mark of Srivatsa, and adorned with a garland of sylvan flowers, must be Sri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, and none else. And resolving that since he was unarmed and was going on foot, he too must encounter him unarmed and unmounted in unarmed single combat. The Yavana pursued him with intent to overtake him while he was running fast with his back turned against him, although he is not within easy reach even of those adept in yoga. The Yavana chief was lured far away to a mountain cave by Sri Krishna, who showed himself at every step as though within grasp. Though still at his heels, reproaching him in words such as, "It does not become you, born in the race of Yadu, to run away," he could not get at him, his evil destiny having not yet been exhausted. Even though censured in this way, the Lord entered deep into the mountain cave. Having penetrated it himself, the Yavana found another man lying asleep there. "Surely, having brought me far away, the fellow is lying here like an innocent man," saying thus to himself and taking him to be Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord. The stupid fellow struck the sleeping man freely with his foot. Waking up and slowly opening his eyes, the man, who had been long asleep, gazed all round and beheld the Yavana standing by his side. Burnt by the fire produced out of the Yavana's own body at the look of the sleeping man, as the look of the sleeping man, who felt enraged on having been awakened so rudely and abruptly, fell on him, he was reduced to ashes in an instant, O scion of Bharata. The Raja Parikshit said, "What was that man called who killed the Yavana, O holy Brahmana, and to whose race did he belong? What prowess did he possess in reality? Wherefore did he go to sleep in the cave, and whose seed was he?" Sri Shuka replied, "Born in the race of Ikshvaku and an eminent son of Mandhata, he was known as Muchukunda, and was not only supremely devoted to the Brahmanas, but true to his promise. He was entreated for their protection by the hosts of Devas led by Indra, who were terribly afraid of the demons, and accordingly he ensured their safety for a long time. Having found in Guha, the son of Lord Shiva, the guardian of heaven, they now said to Muchukunda, 'O Raja, cease you now from the uphill task of protecting us on all sides. Since you have been busy protecting us, having completely renounced your kingdom on the mortal plane, which had all its enemies wiped out, all your enjoyments have ceased. Your sons and wives and relations, ministers and counselors, and even the people of your time survive no more, having been swept away by the cruel hand of death. The time spirit is mightier than the mighty. It is the almighty and immortal Lord himself. Like a herdsman driving a herd, it sweeps away created beings in mere sport. May good betide you. Ask of us today any boon other than liberation, for the imperishable Lord Vishnu is the sole authority capable of granting that." Thus addressed by the Devas, King Muchukunda of great renown respectfully saluted the Devas and, Entering deep into the cave, and a footnote here tells us the location of this cave. It's to the south of Mathura. Krishna clearly fled south, near what's now the town now called Dholpur in the state of Rajasthan. And overpowered by a very long spell of sleep, vouchsafed by the Devas in response to his prayer, lay down to repose there. So the only boon that he asked of them was extremely long sleep after his exhausting war against demons. The Devas said, "Let him, however, who thoughtlessly awakens you when fallen into sleep in the middle of your rest, be instantly reduced to mere ashes when but seen by you." On the Yavana having thus been converted into ashes, Lord Sri Krishna, the foremost of the Yadus, showed himself to the wise Muchukunda. Beholding the Lord, dark as a cloud, clad in yellow silk, bearing the mark of Srivatsa on his breast, irradiated with the brilliant Kaustubha gem, endowed with 4 arms, splendid with a garland of sylvan flowers, wearing a lovely and cheerful countenance, and adorned with a pair of shining crocodile-shaped earrings, captivating to the sight of human beings, enlivened with a lovely smile and endearing glances, possessed of a charming youth, walking with the charming gait of a proud lion, and formidable as it were by his glory, and overwhelmed by his luster. The king, who was possessed of great wisdom, was filled with awe and slowly inquired of him. Muchukunda submitted, "Who may you be, arrived in the mountain cave? And how is it that you roam about in this forest, abounding in thorns, with your feet tender as the petals of a lotus? Are you the effulgence incarnate of the effulgent, or the glorious fire god, the sun god, the moon god, or the mighty Indra, the ruler of paradise, or any other Lokapala?" And then he realizes and says, "I consider you to be Lord Vishnu, out of the 3 rulers of gods, as you are dispelling the darkness of this cave by your effulgence, even as a lamp. May you, O jewel among men, tell us, who are sincerely eager to hear, about your birth, doings, or family name, if it pleases you. We, for our part, O tiger among men, are Kshatriyas by caste and belong to the race of Ikshvaku. I am sprung from the loins of Mandhata, son of Yuvanashva, and called by the name of Muchukunda, O Lord. Wearied with vigil extending over long ages, while engaged in protecting the Devas against the onslaughts of the demons, and with my senses overpowered by sleepiness, I had lain asleep in this lonely cave undisturbed, till I was aroused just now by someone. He too has been reduced to ashes, surely by his own sin. Immediately afterward was noticed by me your glorious self, the destroyer of foes. Dazzled by your unbearable effulgence, we are unable to look at you for a long time, O highly blessed one. Especially, I imagine, since he has been in this dark cave for a long time. You deserve to be honored by embodied souls." Respectfully addressed in these words by the king, the Lord, who is the protector of all created beings, heartily laughed and replied in a voice deep as the rumbling of clouds. The glorious Lord said, "My avataranas, exploits, and appellations, O beloved one, number thousands and cannot actually be counted even by me because of their being infinite in number. Someone might have at any time in the past been able, through many lives, to count the particles of dust on the earth, but one could never reckon my excellences, exploits, and names, or even my avataranas. The greatest sages, like Narada and Sanaka, cannot reach the end of my avataranas and doings relating to the past, present, and future, if they try to enumerate them in order. Nevertheless, O beloved monarch, hear from me as I tell you of those relating to the present day. Prayed to of yore by Brahma the Creator for the vindication of virtue and the extermination of the demons that were proving a burden to the earth, I have appeared in the house of Anakadundubi in the race of Yadu. They call me by the name of Vasudeva because of my being the most distinguished son of Vasudeva, although I have been known by this name even before in a different sense, of course. The demon Kalanemi, born as Kansa, has been killed by me, as well as Pralamba and other enemies of the righteous. And this Yavana has been burnt to death, O Raja, through your fiery eyes. Having been repeatedly entreated by you before, I, the said Vasudeva, have come to this cave for the purpose of showering my grace on you, fond as I am of my devotees. Ask boons of your choice, O Raja Rishi. I shall confer on you all your desired objects. Nobody who has sought me for protection will have cause to grieve anymore. Sri Shuka continued. Recollecting the prediction of sage Garga the elder, and realizing Sri Krishna to be none else than Lord Narayana, when addressed in these words by the Lord, Muchukunda bowed low to him and, full of joy, spoke. And a footnote here tells us about recollecting the prediction of sage Garga the elder, that Muchukunda had been told by the sage Vridha Garga, the elder Garga, that the Lord himself would appear in the house of Vasudeva in the 28th round of Dvapara Yuga in the course of the present Manvantara, and that the King Muchukunda would have the rare and unique privilege of beholding him and talking to him. Muchukunda prayed, deluded by your Maya and blind to the reality, O Lord, this creature, appearing as a male, now as a male or now as a female, does not worship you but remains attached to the home, which is a source of misery, in search of happiness, of which it is deprived. Having somehow secured, without effort, birth, which is difficult to attain, in this land, as a human being sound of body and mind, O sinless Lord, man does not take refuge in your lotus feet, his mind being set on the pleasures of sense, and remains sunk in household life, even like a beast fallen into a well overgrown with grass. This life of mine, O invincible Lord, has slipped in vain in endless anxiety. A ruler of the earth as I was, with my pride puffed up by a royal fortune, viewing this mortal frame as my own self and remaining attached to children, wives, treasury, and lands. With the feeling about this body, which is as much apart from me as a jar or a wall, being my own self, and a ruler of men, deeply rooted. This feeling was deeply rooted in his mind. Traversing the earth in all directions, surrounded by generals commanding regiments of chariots, elephants, horses, and foot soldiers, and forgetting you, I had grown very haughty, alert as the serpent that grabs a rat, licking the ends of its lips through hunger. You as death suddenly overtake the embodied soul that is utterly forgetful, engrossed as it is in the thought of its projects, and not only hankers after the pleasures of sense, but finds its thirst immensely aggravated. The same body which was formerly, while moving about in chariots adorned with gold ornaments, or on young elephants, bore the title of a ruler of men, later passes by the name of excrement of worms or of ashes, when seized by you disguised as death, which is hard to escape. Having fully conquered all the quarters, with all possibility of future conflict precluded, and occupying a high seat, and hailed by monarchs that were once his equals, the man, O Lord, is led as a toy deer of young women in the home, which offers sexual pleasures. Devoted heart and soul to austerities, with all enjoyment ceased, and making gifts in the hope of securing such enjoyments hereafter, he performs actions in order that he may be reborn as Indra, or as another universal monarch. He whose thirst is fully developed is never able to enjoy happiness, because they will always be overpowered with such thirst for greater and greater pleasures. When the end of the cycle of birth and death in the case of a soul undergoing transmigration is in sight, then his meeting with some saint takes place, O immortal Lord. When there is fellowship with a saint, then alone is engendered a feeling of devotion to you, the refuge of saints and the ruler of the high and the low. I conclude that a unique favor has been done to me by you, O Lord, and that the shackles of sovereignty have fallen off my feet without effort on my part, a consummation which is devoutly sought for by wise kings ruling over the entire globe and intending to retire into the woods with a vow to live alone. I do not covet any boon other than service to your sacred feet, which is the highest blessing worth coveting in the eyes of those who have nothing to call their own, O Almighty Lord. For having propitiated you, the bestower of liberation, O Hari, what wise man would ask a boon which is calculated to bind the soul? Therefore, rejecting, O Lord, all blessings associated with the gunas of sattva, rajas, and tamas, I run to you, the Supreme Person, who are pure consciousness, free from Maya, above the gunas, and one without a second. Long afflicted in this world with the fruits of actions and being tormented with the impressions left on the mind by those actions, with my 6 foes, meaning the 5 senses and the mind, not free from thirst, and having not been able to secure peace, I have somehow duly reached, O bestower of knowledge concerning yourself, your lotus feet, which are divorced from fear and grief, and which are all truth, O Supreme Spirit. Protect me, O Lord, distressed as I am. The glorious Lord replied, O Maharaja, O ruler of the entire globe, your mind is free from impurities, and powerful in that it could not be lured by enjoyments, even though you were tempted with boons of your choice. Know that it was to show your vigilance that you were tempted with boons. The judgment of those who are exclusively devoted to me can never be perverted by sensuous enjoyments. The mind of those other than devotees, even though they try to curb it through breath control, etc., is seen to become riotous again, its craving for enjoyment having not ceased, O Raja. With your mind set on me, wander the earth at pleasure. May your devotion to me continue uninterrupted forever, as a matter of course. Devoted to the duties of a kshatriya, the protection of your subjects, you killed game through hunting, etc. Looking upon me as your asylum and collected in mind, get rid of the sinful tendency acquired through such practices by recourse to asceticism. Being reborn as a Brahmana, most friendly to all created beings, in your very next incarnation, O Muchukunda, you will then surely attain to me, the Absolute. Thus ends the 51st discourse entitled Muchukunda's Eulogy in the latter half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 52, which has a long title because it quickly covers several subjects. Sri Krishna's withdrawal to Dwaraka, Balarama's marriage, Rupini sends a Brahmana with a message to Sri Krishna. Sri Shuka began again. Thus blessed, O dear Parikshit, by Sri Krishna, Muchukunda, a scion of Ikshvaku, went round him clockwise as a mark of respect, and bowing low to him, came out into the open country through the mouth of the cave. Observing diminutive men, beasts, plants, and trees, smaller than those of his own age, and concluding the age of Kali to have set in, he proceeded in a northerly direction. Now, when we say concluding the age of Kali to have set in, the Kali Yuga has not at this time fully set in, but they are in the Yuga Sandvansha of Dvapara Yuga, the twilight in which Dvapara Yuga is blending into Kali Yuga. So the age of Kali is beginning to set in, even though technically it is still Dvapara Yuga. He proceeded in a northerly direction. Full of faith in austerities, self-possessed, free from attachment, and concentrating his mind on Sri Krishna, Muchukunda, who had his doubts cleared, entered deep into the forest on Mount Gandhamadana. Reaching Badrikashrama, containing the abode of the divine sages Nara and Narayana, he sought the favor of Sri Hari through asceticism, enduring all pairs of opposites such as heat and cold, and remaining tranquil at all times. Going back to the city of Mathura, which continued to be beleaguered by the Yavanas, and wiping out the barbarian host, the Lord took away their wealth to Dwaraka, the new city that he built and transferred his people to. While the treasure was being thus carried away on the back of oxen and men directed by Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, Jarasandha appeared on the scene, leading an army consisting of 23 Akshauhinis. Observing the impetuosity of the onrush of the enemy's host, attacking their baggage train, Balarama and Sri Krishna, the two scions of Madhu, who had adopted the ways of human beings, took to their heels at once. Leaving the immense spoils, the two brothers covered many a mile with their feet, resembling lotus petals, as though terribly afraid, though of course they were absolutely fearless. Laughing heartily to see them flying like cowards, the powerful Jarasandha, the ruler of Magadha, pursued them with the hosts of chariots, not knowing the greatness of the two almighty brothers. Having run fast for a long distance, and therefore appearing fully exhausted, they nevertheless climbed up a lofty mountain bearing the name of Pravarshana, where the glorious Indra, the god of rain, perpetually reigns. concluding them to have hidden somewhere on the mountain, and not knowing the exact place of their concealment, O protector of men, Jarasandha set the whole mountain ablaze with the help of piles of wood, strewing fire all around. Then, springing up with great impetuosity from the mountain peak, which was 10 yojanas high and whose sides were all burning, they descended on the plains across the area occupied by the besieging army. Not being perceived by the enemy, Jarasandha and his followers, Sri Krishna and Balarama, the two jewels of Yadu's race, who had successfully snuck away, came back to their own city of Dwaraka, which had the sea for its moat, O protector of men, being located on a peninsula off of the coast of Gujarat. Falsely taking Balarama and Sri Krishna as burnt to death, the aforesaid Jarasandha, the ruler of Magadha, too returned to Magadha, taking back with him the very large army. Urged by Brahma the creator, the glorious Kakudmi, son of Revata, the suzerain lord of the Anartas. The Anartas are the people of the territory of what in modern times is called Katiyavad or Saurashtra, gave away his daughter Revati to Balarama in marriage. This has already been narrated. That was mentioned back in Book 9. Having vanquished by dint of prowess, the kings ranged on the side of Shishupala, the ruler of Chedi, a rival suitor, the foremost of whom was Shalva. Lord Sri Krishna, the protector of cows, too, O jewel among the Karus, espoused in a choice marriage Rukmini, the princess of Vidarbha. Vidarbha is what in modern India is called Berar. She was the daughter of Bhishmaka, the ruler of Vidarbha, and a part manifestation of Sri, the goddess Lakshmi, even as Garuda carried away the jar of Amrita, while all people stood gazing. The Raja Parikshit said, the Lord espoused Rukmini, the daughter of Bhishmaka, of lovely countenance, according to the Rakshasa mode of marriage, so it is heard. The Rakshasa mode of marriage being abduction. O divine sage, I long to hear in detail this story of Sri Krishna of unlimited energy, how he snatched away the girl, having conquered Jarasandha, the ruler of Magadha, Shalva, and others. O holy Brahmana, what man who is capable of understanding and appreciating what he has heard would feel sated, as a matter of fact, while hearing the stories of Sri Krishna, which are not only delightful to hear and ever interesting, but bring a great reward to the listener and wipe out the sins of mankind. Sri Shuka continued, there was a great king, Bhishmaka by name, who was the suzerain lord of Vidarbha. 5 sons and 1 daughter of charming countenance were born to him. The eldest of them was Rukmi, Rukmaratha the next, and then followed in order of sequence, Rukmabahu, Rukmakesha, and Rukmamali. Rukmini was their virtuous sister. Having closely heard about the comeliness, valor, excellences, and affluence of Sri Krishna, the bestower of liberation, as being celebrated by visitors to her house, she began to look upon him as her befitting husband. Sri Krishna too made up his mind to marry her in an appropriate manner, knowing her to be an embodiment of intelligence, auspicious bodily characteristics, generosity, physical charm, amiability, and other virtues, and a worthy consort. Rukmi, the eldest prince, who hated Sri Krishna, proposed Shishupala, the ruler of Chedi, to be his sister's husband, deterring his relations, his parents and brothers, who intended to give away Rukmini to Sri Krishna, a protector of men, deterring them from that course. Greatly troubled in mind to learn this and pondering, the beautiful Rukmini, the princess of Vidarbha, speedily dispatched a trusted Brahmana to bring Sri Krishna to her father's capital. Having duly reached Dwaraka, and having been ushered into the Lord's presence by the porters, he beheld Sri Krishna, the most ancient person, seated on a throne of gold. Because despite Krishna refusing to officially be the Raja and insisting that Ugrasena hold that role, everyone, including Ugrasena, wants Sri Krishna to be the Raja in practice. And so he very frequently sits on the throne and governs as Raja, even though he is technically never coronated, but is simply an assistant of the Raja Ugrasena, helping him with his duties. Seeing him from a distance, Sri Krishna, a devotee of the Brahmanas, got down from his throne, and having seated the visitor on the throne, honored him in the same way as the denizens of heaven honored him whenever he went to their abode. Approaching him, when he had taken his meal and rested a while, and gently kneading his feet with his hand, Sri Krishna, the goal of the righteous, coolly inquired of him, I hope, O jewel among the foremost of Brahmanas, your religious observances approved by the elders are going on without much difficulty, and I hope your mind is ever complacent. When a Brahmana remains contented with whatever is obtained, never swerving from his sacred duty, such contentment actually yields to him all his desired blessings. A discontented ruler of devas, too, only migrates one after another to the higher worlds, while a contented soul, even though destitute, enjoys a sound sleep with all his limbs, including his mental limb, free from anguish. I salute again and again with my head bent low, pious and placid Brahmanas, contented with whatever is got unasked, and most friendly to all created beings, yet free from egotism. Are you enjoying security, O Brahmana, at the hands of your Raja? Indeed, he is dear to me, in whose dominion the people protected by him live happily. If it is not secret, pray tell us everything, whence and seeking what you have come to this place, crossing the sea. What work of yours can we do? Politely asked these relevant questions by Sri Krishna, the supreme ruler of the universe, who had assumed an embodied form for the sake of mere fun, the Brahmana told him everything. How the parents of Rupini planned to give her away to Sri Krishna, but how their plans were being thwarted by her eldest brother Rupini, who was in favor of marrying her to Shishupala, the ruler of Chedi, and had sent formal invitation to Shishupala. He then delivered to Sri Krishna the following message from Rukmini. It is not clear whether he just relates the message orally or whether it's a written letter. Most versions of the story portray it as a written letter, but that's not explicit in the Bhagavata. Rukmini says, having heard, O immortal Lord, most handsome in all the three worlds, of your excellences, which entering deep into the heart through the apertures of the ears dispel the agony of the hearts, O beloved one, as well as of your charming appearance, which vouchsafes to those that have eyes all the blessings sought for by their eyes. My mind has been set on you, all shame having fled away from it. What noble, firm, and high-born maiden, O bestower of liberation, will not, on her coming of age, elect you as her husband? You, O lion among men, who are your own compeer in point of pedigree, good disposition, comeliness of form, learning, youthfulness, opulence, and glory. Your own compeer being a way of saying no one else is your compeer in those attributes. And ravish the mind of all mankind. Hence you have indeed been elected by me as my husband, O darling, and this body has been bestowed on you. Pray take me to wife here at my father's home. Let not Shishupala forthwith touch this share of a hero like a jackal defiling the quarry of a lion, O lotus-eyed Lord. If the almighty Lord Narayana, the supreme ruler of the universe, has thoroughly been propitiated by me through works of public utility, such as the digging of wells and tanks, the construction of temples, laying out gardens, and the distribution of food grains, sacrificial performances, charitable gifts, religious observances such as taking a dip in holy waters, fasting, offering worship to gods, the Brahmanas, elders, and so on. Evidently, such works of public utility, such as digging of wells and tanks and building temples and gardens, are things she has done. Probably not herself, but as the princess having commissioned these works. May Sri Krishna, the elder brother of Gada, and not others, such as Shishupala, the son of Dhamagosha, come and espouse me. Duly reaching the territory of Vidarbha, the city of Kundinapura, the capital of the rulers of Vidarbha, incognito, at a time when the marriage is going to take place the following day, O invincible Lord. Surrounded by the generals of your army and completely crushing the forces of Shishupala, the ruler of Chedi, and Jarasandha, the king of Magadha, marry me perforce according to the system prevalent among the Rakshasas, winning me as a prize of valor. It's probably worth explaining the types of marriage here, as a footnote does, that there are in Vedic culture, there are 8 types of marriage. There's the Arsha type, in which the bridegroom has to present 2 cows to the bride's father before marriage. The Asura type, prevalent among the Asuras, in which the bride's father accepts large sums of money from the bridegroom as a price for the girl. The Brahma type, in which the bride's father gives away the girl after duly adorning her according to his means. The Paishacha type, this is the mode of marriage practiced by Pishachas, a type of evil spirits, and it's considered an evil and unlawful type of marriage, which is to rape a girl while she is asleep, intoxicated, or deranged, the way that evil spirits will sometimes do. The Daiva type, practiced by Devas, in which the wife is given to a priest officiating at a yajna. The Gandharva mode of marriage, practiced by Gandharvas and Apsaras, in which a pair marry by mutual consent without ceremonies and with no involvement of their relatives. They simply consummate the marriage through sexual intercourse, traditionally in a forest, and are then married essentially by common law. The Rakshasa type, the mode practiced by Rakshasas, in which a girl is taken away by force, vanquishing anyone who tries to prevent the abduction. And it's this type that Rukmini is requesting Krishna do. Or the Prajapatya type, in which there is no sort of dowry, but the girl is given away without receiving any present from the bridegroom, on the express understanding that the two will practice virtue together. So Rukmini is explicitly requesting that Krishna abduct her by the Rakshasa mode of marriage. And she says, if you urge, how can I marry you without killing your relations, which are sure to resist any attempt on my part to take you by force, living as you do within the 4 walls of the gynecium, I hereby tell you beforehand the means of securing me without spilling the blood of my relations. On the eve of my marriage, a grand procession will be taken out to the temple of the goddess Ambika, our Kula Devi, in which the young bride has to go out of the palace to have the darshan of the goddess Parvati, the daughter of Himavan, the king of mountains. If I do not secure your grace, O lotus-eyed Lord, a bath in the dust of whose lotus feet great souls like Lord Shiva, the spouse of Uma, seek to obtain for dispelling their darkness, I shall lay down my life, withered through fasting, in the hope that the grace may be secured through 100 births, to one day marry you, essentially. The Brahmana concluded, these are the secret messages brought by me, O Sri Krishna, the adored of the Yadus. Considering them, whatever is worth doing in this connection may be done without delay. Thus ends the 52nd discourse bearing on the subject of Rukmini's wedding, in the latter half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 53, Sri Krishna carries away Rukmini. Sri Shuka began again. Hearing the message of Rukmini, the princess of Vidarbha, the said Sri Krishna, a scion of Yadu, however, heartily laughed, and warmly clasping the Brahmana's hand by his own, spoke as follows. The glorious Lord said, my mind is likewise set on her, and I get no sleep at night. I know my marriage with her has been stopped by Rukmi out of personal grudge. Having routed in battle the vile kings that will be assembled at Kundinapura, I shall bring to Dwaraka that princess of faultless limbs, so devoted to me, even as one would snatch a flame out of firewood. Sri Shuka continued. Having come to know definitely through the Brahmana about the constellation under which the wedding of Rukmini was going to take place, in other words, exactly when it was scheduled, Sri Madhusudana said to his charioteer, let the chariot be got ready at once, O Daruka. Having brought the chariot drawn by horses, it's a 4-horse chariot, and the names of the horses are Shaibya, Sugriva, Meghapushpa, and Balahaka. Daruka, the charioteer, too stood before the Lord with joined palms. Mounting the chariot and picking up the Brahmana too, since he is going to the Brahmana's home, and so he might as well give him a ride there. Sri Krishna, grandson of Shura, journeyed from Anarta to the Vidarbha territory in the course of a single night with the help of those swift horses. Following the wishes of his son Rukmi out of affection for him and intending to give away his girl Rukmini to Shishupala, against his own initial judgment, the aforesaid King Bhishmaka, the ruler of Kundinapura, had the necessary rites preliminary to the wedding performed in due course. The city of Kundinapura, whose roads, streets, and crossings were cleanly swept and amply sprinkled with water, and which was crowded with men and women, decked with sandal paste, garlands, and other ornaments of flowers, clad in spotless white and adorned with jewels, and was full of splendid mansions perfumed with incense of aloe, was tastefully decorated with flags of various designs and colors, as well as with ornamental arches. Having duly worshipped the ancestors and the gods in accordance with the scriptural ordinance, the protector of men, and fed Brahmanas and others, each in his rightful place, the king caused benedictory verses to be recited by Brahmanas for the welfare of his daughter. He also caused his daughter of charming teeth to be duly washed and adorned with an auspicious thread, with a small piece of gold fastened to it in the middle, and further decked with a brand new pair of silken pieces and excellent ornaments. The foremost among the Brahmanas ensured the safety of the bride against evil spirits and the evil eye by reciting sacred texts from the Samaveda, Rigveda, and Yajurveda, while the family priest, who was well versed in Atharvaveda, poured oblations into the sacred fire for the propitiation of grahas, performing the Navagraha Homa. The Raja, who was foremost among those conversant with scriptural ordinances, gave away to Brahmanas gold, silver, and textiles, as well as sesamum seeds mixed with jaggery, and also cows. Likewise, Raja Damaghosha, the ruler of Chedi, too caused all that was worth undertaking on festive occasions to be performed in the interests of his son Shishupala by Brahmanas well versed in sacred texts. So Shishupala is repeatedly called the ruler of Chedi. Technically, his father is still alive and ruling, but everyone seems to speak as if Shishupala is the power that rules Chedi, and that his father basically does whatever he wants. Similar to Rupini in Kundinapura. Surrounded by hosts of elephants discharging temporal fluid, war chariots hung with gold necklaces, and troops teeming with foot soldiers and cavalry, Damaghosha marched to Kundinapura. Going forth with due ceremony to meet him and honoring him in every way, Bhishmaka, the suzerain lord of Vidarbha, gladly lodged him in another mansion specially constructed for the bridegroom and his party. Shalva, Jarasandha, Dantavaktra, Vidurata, Paundraka, and other kings, belonging to the party of Shishupala and inimical to Sri Krishna and Balarama, also appeared there in the city of Kundinapura in thousands, thousands meaning counting all the people who come with them, bent on securing the bride for Shishupala. Having made up their minds that they would jointly contend with Sri Krishna in case he should go there accompanied by Balarama and other Yadus and attempt to take away the bride, the aforesaid kings had all arrived there with their entire host and all their mounts. Hearing of this collective military effort on the part of kings belonging to the opposite party, and of Sri Krishna having gone all by himself to take away the princess, Lord Balarama apprehended strife. Overwhelmed with fraternal affection, therefore, he proceeded post-haste to Kundinapura, accompanied by a huge army consisting of elephants, horses, chariots, and foot soldiers. Yearning for the arrival of Sri Hari, and not seeing the Brahmana return, the beautiful daughter of Bhishma thereupon thought, and to clarify, this is daughter of Bhishmaka, Bhishma for short, unrelated to the famous Bhishma of Hastinapura. She thereupon thought within herself as follows: my wedding, unlucky as I am, comes off only after the interval of a night. The lotus-eyed lord has not yet turned up. I do not know the reason for it. Even the Brahmana who bore my message has not returned till this moment. Perhaps having found something disgusting in me, the Lord, who is faultless in character, is surely not coming to marry me, though prepared to leave Dwaraka in the first instance. Though prepared, like as in though he could. That is why the Brahmana, too, whom the Lord would otherwise have brought with him, has not been able to reach Kundinapura in time, coming as he is on foot, disappointed and disheartened. Neither Brahma, the ordainer of events and the dispenser of fruit of one's good or evil actions, nor Shiva, the Supreme Lord, is propitious to me. and goddess Gauri, the daughter of Himalaya, the king of mountains, and the virtuous spouse of Lord Shiva, is unfavorable to me. Pondering thus, the young maiden, whose mind had been ravished by Sri Krishna, the protector of cows, and who knew that the time was not suitable for shedding tears, closed her eyes, bedimmed as they were with teardrops. Meanwhile, the left thigh, arm, and eye of the bride, who had thus been awaiting the arrival of Sri Krishna, the protector of cows, throbbed, auguring delightful news, O Raja. Specially instructed by Sri Krishna to report his arrival, the same Sunanda, the foremost of Brahmanas, so the tradition goes, forthwith saw the princess who dwelt in the gymnasium and shone brightly with joy born of her meeting with Sri Krishna in contemplation. Full of bright smiles to find him wearing a cheerful countenance and unfaltering of gait, which gave the impression that his mission had been a success, the said virtuous maiden, who could read what was in the mind of another from the latter's facial expression and other indications, made detailed inquiries of him about Sri Krishna. He apprised her of Sri Krishna, a scion of Yadu, having come to the city, and further conveyed to her the unfailing assurance given by the Lord that he would take her to his home at Dwaraka. Delighted at heart to know for certain the fact of his having arrived at Kundinapura in secret, and seeing no other boon worth conferring on the Brahmana in return for his unique service, the said Rukmini, the princess of Vidarbha, bowed to him, and thereby expressed her lasting indebtedness to him, which automatically entitled him to infinitely more than the wealth of the entire universe, she being no other than Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth and prosperity. Hearing of Balarama and Sri Krishna having arrived in Kundinapura, eager to witness the wedding of his daughter, Bhishmaka went forth to meet them with a flourish of trumpets and excellent articles of worship, offering madhuparka, a delicious and refreshing preparation made of curds and honey and offered to an esteemed guest or to the bridegroom on the latter's arrival at the door of the bride's father, immaculate garments and welcome presents of various kinds, he duly worshipped them in accordance with the scriptural ordinance. And so it is a very significant thing that Bhishmaka welcomed Krishna with madhuparka on this occasion, because it's true that madhuparka is given to esteemed guests, but it is also given to the bridegroom. And being that Krishna was his original preference of bridegroom for his daughter, to give madhuparka to anyone other than Shishupala on the very eve of the wedding is somewhat a sign that Bhishmaka suspects what Krishna is doing and is kind of giving him his blessing. Though he is publicly going ahead with the marriage to Shishupala. Assigning them along with their troops and retinue an abode equipped with all luxuries and amenities, the highly intelligent monarch, who could easily perceive that Sri Krishna had arrived with the intention of marrying Rukmini, offered hospitality in a befitting manner. He likewise duly entertained all the assembled kings by supplying them with all the objects of their desire with due regard to the prowess, age, might, and financial status of each. Hearing of Sri Krishna having arrived, the residents of Kundinapura came out of their houses to see him and enjoyed to their heart's content the beauty of his lotus-like countenance, with both their eyes together, even as one would quaff honey with the hollow of one's joined palms. They said to one another, Rukmini alone and no other girl deserves to be his consort, and he alone of faultless limbs is the most worthy match for Rukmini, the daughter of Bhishma. Pleased with whatever meritorious deed has been performed by us in this or any previous existence, may God, the maker of the three worlds, show his grace, and let Sri Krishna and none else marry the princess of Vidarbha. Thus spoke the citizens to one another, bound as they were by ties of intense love for Rukmini. And guarded by soldiers, the maiden Rukmini drove out of the gymnasium to the temple of goddess Ambika, deeply contemplating on the lotus feet of Sri Krishna, the bestower of liberation, with her speech duly controlled, surrounded by her female companions and protected by gallant soldiers of the king's personal guard, who were clad in armor and marched with uplifted weapons. She sallied out of her chariot at the outermost entrance of the temple, on foot, along with her mother and elderly ladies, to behold the feet, tender like soft leaves, of goddess Parvati, the consort of Lord Shiva. Clay tom-toms, conchas, and large drums, as well as clarionets and kettle drums, were sounded as she walked. Surrounding the royal bride walked with her the foremost of dancing girls in thousands, with a variety of offerings and other articles of worship. Brahmana's wives, well adorned with garlands, sandal paste, costumes, and jewels, songsters singing songs, and other musicians playing on musical instruments, as well as suttas, who are those versed in ancient legends, such as the Puranas, Magadhas, and Vandis, who glorified her. Having washed her lotus-like hands and feet and sipped water on reaching the main shrine of the goddess, and thus purified and tranquil of mind, she entered into the presence of Goddess Ambika, the Divine Mother. Elderly Brahmana ladies, conversant with the ritual, helped the girl to extol Goddess Parvati, the consort of Lord Shiva, along with Shiva. So this is a common thing in temples and such. They say a mantra and then she repeats the mantra after them. I repeatedly bow to you, the consort of Lord Shiva, along with your children, Lord Ganesha and Lord Kartikeya. Let Lord Sri Krishna be my husband, she is adding. Presumably they're not telling her that part since she's marrying Shishupala today. And may you give countenance to it. She then duly worshipped severally the goddess as well as her family, the goddess's family, Shiva, Ganesha, Kartikeya, and so on, with water for washing the hands and feet of the goddess with and other such purposes, with sandal paste, unbroken grains of rice, varieties of incense, raiment of various description, garlands, necklaces, and other ornaments, edibles and other articles of worship of various kinds, and rows of lights be waved around the goddess in arati, so performing the full Shodashoparchara puja. And likewise worshipped with due ceremony Brahmana matrons whose husbands were alive with the same articles, as well as with seasoned small round cakes of flour or meal, betel leaves accompanied with areca nut parings, lime, catechu, and cardamoms, etc., auspicious colored thread to be put around the neck, fruits of diverse kinds, and sugar canes. The aforesaid Brahmana ladies gave her a part of the offerings made to the goddess as prasada, and added their own blessings. The bride, for her part, bowed to them as well as to the goddess and accepted the offerings made. Then, terminating her vow of silence, she came out of the main shrine of Goddess Ambika, the Divine Mother, holding tightly by the hand a maidservant with her own hand brilliant with jeweled rings. Smitten with love kindled by her, the illustrious warriors felt bewildered to behold the princess, who was possessed of a shapely, slender waist and had not yet attained full puberty, and who had a girdle of jewels thrown about her hips, and in whom signs of womanhood were just manifesting themselves, whose charming countenance was graced with earrings, and whose eyes were moving as though afraid of her curly locks that overhung her face. That's a poetic way of saying that she was glancing all around because they don't realize why she's glancing all around, but of course she's looking for Krishna, hoping to be snatched by him at some point and on the lookout for when she should jump out of line to join him. Who had a bright smile playing on her lips, and whose teeth, white as jasmine buds, looked red due to the luster of her lips, cherry as a ripe bimba fruit, who possessed the gait of a female swan and was walking with her feet shining by the splendor of brilliant jingling anklets, and who cast her spell even on heroes as though she were the very Maya of the Lord, which of course she was, being an avatar herself. Stupefied to perceive Rupini, who under the pretext of going out in a procession to the temple had all the time been offering her loveliness to Sri Krishna, the aforesaid kings, whose mind was captivated by her winsome smiles and bashful glances, and who had unconsciously dropped their weapons, themselves fell to the ground, bowing to her, mounted as they were on elephants and horses as well as in chariots. Eagerly looking forward to the arrival of the Lord at that time, and therefore slowly moving, as aforesaid, her feet, that resembled a pair of mobile lotus buds, and removing her flowing locks from her eyes with the fingers of her left hand, the princess coyly looked with the corners of her eyes at the kings arrived, and while doing so, she espied Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord. Sri Krishna snatched away the princess even as she sought to mount her chariot, unmindful of his adversaries, Shishupala, Jarasandha, and others who stood gazing. And having comfortably seated her in his own chariot, bearing the emblem of Garuda, and setting at naught the whole host of kshatriyas present there, Sri Krishna, the spouse of Lakshmi, then slowly departed toward Dwaraka, along with others headed by Balarama, even as a lion would carry off its game from the midst of jackals. His proud adversaries, who were all under the domination of Jarasandha, did not brook that discomfiture of theirs, or that loss of reputation. They said to one another, "Fie upon us in that our glory, although we continued to wield our bow and were as good as lions, has been snatched away by cowherds, who are no better than deer." And in other words, they're about to attack. Thus ends the 53rd discourse, entitled "The Lord Carries Away Rukmini," in the latter half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 54, the discomfiture of Shishupala's allies and Rukmi, and the espousal of Rukmini by Sri Krishna solemnized. Sri Shuka began again. Riding on their mounts and surrounded each by his own troops, all the aforesaid kings, full of rage, ran with the foregoing words in hot pursuit of Sri Krishna, wielding their bows and clad in armor. Seeing them rushing, the celebrated generals of the Yadava army, which Balarama had brought along, stood facing them, O king, twanging their bows. Like clouds pouring showers on mountains, the adversaries, who were skilled soldiers and rode on horseback, the shoulders of elephants and in their seat on the chariots, discharged volleys of shafts on the Yadava warriors. Perceiving the army of her spouse screened by showers of arrows, Rukmini bashfully looked at his face with eyes confounded through fear. Laughing heartily, the Lord said to her, "Do not be afraid, O fair-eyed one. The yonder army of the enemies will be destroyed just now with the help of your own troops." Intolerant of the aforementioned prowess of the enemies, Gada, Sankarshana, and other heroes of the Yadava army proceeded to strike with narachas, a particular type of arrows, the horses and elephants as well as the chariots of the hostile army. There fell to the ground in tens of millions, heads adorned with earrings, diadems, and turbans, hands bearing swords, maces, and bows, forearms, thighs, and feet of car warriors, horsemen, and soldiers fighting on elephants, as well as heads of horses, mules, elephants, camels, donkeys, and men. Their armies being beaten thus by the Vrishnis, who were keen after victory, the kings led by Jarasandha turned their backs and withdrew from the field of battle. Approaching Shishupala, who felt distressed as though his wedded wife had been abducted and was cheerless and dispirited, and whose face was withering through melancholy, Jarasandha and others spoke to him as follows: "O tiger among men, shake off this despondency. Permanence of joy and sorrow is not seen in embodied beings, O king. As a puppet dances to the will of the showman, likewise did this creature exert according to the will of Providence, so as to reap joy and sorrow." Having sustained defeat at the hands of Krishna, the scion of Shura, and as many as 17 encounters, though followed by 23 Akshalhinis, I won only one battle, the last one. Yet I never grieve over discomfiture nor exult over victory, knowing as I do the world to be ravaged by them, coupled with destiny. Of course, Jarasandha is blatantly lying here. He was extremely depressed after his initial defeat and almost resigned the kingship over it, and these friends talked him out of it. But he goes on. This time, too, we leaders of those commanding troops of warriors have all been vanquished by the Yadus protected by Krishna, though accompanied by a small army. Time being favorable to them, the enemies have won this time. We shall excel over them when time is particularly propitious to us. Thus admonished by friends, Shishupala, the ruler of Chedi, returned to his capital, along with his followers. Those other kings, too, such as were surviving, then returned each to his own capital. Surrounded by an army consisting of one Akshalhini, the mighty Rukmi, for his part, who hated Sri Krishna and did not brook his sisters being married by him after the manner of the Rakshasas, followed close upon the heels of Sri Krishna. Enraged and full of indignation, the mighty armed Rukmi, who was clad in armor and armed with a bow, had undertaken the following vow within the hearing of all the kings: "Without making short work of Krishna in an encounter and bringing back Rukmini, I shall not re-enter Kundinapura. Solemnly do I declare this before you." Saying so and mounting his chariot, he commanded the charioteer as follows: "Drive the horses with dispatch to the place where Krishna may be. There is going to be my encounter with him. With my sharp-pointed arrows today, I shall take away the pride of valor of that most evil-minded cowherd, by whom my sister has been forcibly carried away." Pursuing the Lord in a single chariot forthwith, the bragging fool, who did not know the extent of greatness of the Almighty Lord, shouted out to Sri Krishna, the protector of cows, saying, "Stop, stop." Drawing his very tough bow at full length, he hit Sri Krishna with 3 arrows and said, "Wait a moment, my enemy, a disgrace to the race of Yadu. having kidnapped my sister, even as a crow would steal a sacrificial offering. Where are you going? I shall presently take away your pride, O fool, who are wily and given to strategic fighting. Leave my sister before you bite the dust when struck with my arrows. Smilingly tearing his bow, Sri Krishna, tearing his bow is a way of saying like the extreme fervor with which he draws and looses it. Sri Krishna pierced Rukmi with 6 arrows, his 4 horses with 8 more, his charioteer with 2, and his ensign with 3. Taking up another bow, he too hit Sri Krishna back with 5 shafts. Struck with those volleys of arrows, however, Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, rent Rukmi's bow asunder. He snatched yet another, and the imperishable Lord cleft that too. The celebrated Sri Hari tore every weapon that Rukmi took up: an iron club, a sharp-edged spear, a pike, a sword and a shield, a javelin and a bludgeon. Then, leaping down from the chariot, sword in hand, he darted in rage at Sri Krishna with intent to kill him, even as a moth would charge into a flame. While he was thus rushing on, the Lord split his sword and shield into particles with his shafts, and picked up a sharp-edged sword in readiness to make short work of Rukmi. Overwhelmed with fear to behold this endeavor on the part of Sri Krishna to dispose of her brother, the virtuous Rukmini fell at the feet of her spouse and pitifully prayed, O Master of Yoga, O incomprehensible Lord of the universe, O blessed God of gods, O mighty armed one, you ought to kill my brother. Sri Shuka continued, with his feet thus clasped by Rukmini, whose limbs were perceptibly shaking with terror, whose mouth was being parched and throat choked through grief, and whose gold necklace had been displaced through nervousness, the merciful Lord desisted. Binding the evildoer with his own scarf, the Lord disfigured him by shaving him in such a way as to leave intact half of his mustache and shaved half of his head. Meanwhile, the chosen among the Yadava warriors, led by Balarama, crushed the wonderful army of the enemy, even as elephants would trample a lotus plant, as we heard about previously. Making their way into the presence of Sri Krishna, they found their Rukmi reduced to that ignominious plight, and all but dead through shame. Filled with pity to see him bound, the Almighty Lord Sankarsana released him and spoke to Sri Krishna, Krishna, you have perpetrated an impious act abhorred by our race. Partially removing the mustaches and locks of a relative and disfiguring him is tantamount to killing him. Speaking in terms of the pride of Kshatriyas. Turning towards Rukmini, he said, please do not take offense with us, O good lady, thinking of the disfiguration of your brother. None else is responsible for one's joy and sorrow, for a man reaps the fruit of his own doings. A relative does not deserve death at the hands of his relative, even if he has committed an offense deserving such treatment, and should be let off. Why should he who stands killed by his own offense be killed again? Such is the code of conduct specially prescribed for the Kshatriya race by Brahma Prajapati, by virtue of which even a brother is permitted to kill his own brother. Hence it is exceedingly cruel. Reverting to Sri Krishna, the proud alone, who are blinded by pride of fortune, offer indignity to their relatives for the sake of dominion, land, other movable property, women, honor, dignity, or any other consideration. It is your differential outlook through which you, like an ignorant person, constantly bear ill will among all created beings to those who are ill-disposed to you, and wish well to those who are kindly disposed to you. By the Lord's Maya is engendered the self-deception in the mind of those who are identified with the body, that a certain individual is your friend, another your enemy, and a third neutral to you. Indeed, the transcendent self, which is but common to all embodied beings, is perceived by the ignorant as varied, even as a luminary is viewed as different in relation to different vessels full of water in which it is reflected, or as the sky is conceived as different. This body, constituted as it is of physical substances, the senses and the objects of their perception, and has a beginning and an end, and which has been projected through ignorance on the self, subjects the soul to metempsychosis. There is no union or disunion with the self with or from any other substance, there being no such substance other than the self, O virtuous lady, and the appearance of such other substances being attributable to the self alone, just as there is no union or disunion of the sun with or from the eye and color. Changes commencing from birth pertain to the body alone and never to the soul, just as waxing and waning, etc., pertain to the phases of the moon, but not to the moon itself. And indeed, death is attributed to the soul in the same way as the total disappearance of illumination is spoken of as amavasya, the dark of the moon, but having no effect on the actual physical object of the moon, of course. As a dreaming man perceives his own self, as well as the objects of perception, and also experiences pleasure, pain, etc. Even though none of these really exists, it's just in a dream, so does the ignorant jiva undergo transmigration. Therefore, completely getting rid, through realization of truth, of grief born of ignorance that withers and infatuates the soul, be consoled, O young lady of beautiful smiles. Sri Shuka went on, shaking off disconsolation when thus comforted by Lord Balarama, the slim lady eased her mind by recourse to reason. Allowed to escape with life alone, his army as well as his glory having been smashed by his enemies, and his own hopes belied, and brooding over his disfigurement, Rukmi built for his residence a large city, Bhojakata by name. Declaring that he would not re-enter Kundinapura without killing the evil-minded Krishna and recovering Rukmini, he lived there in Bhojakata in a spirit of indignation. Having thus completely routed hostile kings and brought Rukmini to Dwaraka, the Lord espoused her with due ceremony, a jewel among the Kurus. In other words, they had a wedding there. Great was the festivity on that occasion, and the house of all men at Dwaraka, the city of the Yadus, who cherished exclusive devotion to Sri Krishna, the ruler of the Yadus, or protector of men. Full of joy and adorned with earrings made of highly polished gems, men as well as women brought presents for the bride and the bridegroom, who were clad in picturesque attire. That city of the Vrishnis put up a smart appearance with flags raised in honor of Indra, picturesque wreaths, tapestries, and bejeweled ornamental arches, auspicious articles such as fried grains of paddy, sprouts of barley, and flowers placed in front of every door, as well as with pitchers full of water, aloe wood burning as incense and lights. It had its roads moistened by the elephants shedding temporal juice, of invited friendly kings, and was graced with tall plantain and areca nut trees set up at the entrances. Among those running to and fro through excitement in that city, the Kurus, the Sranjayas, the Kaikeyas, the Vidarbhas, the Yadus, and the Kuntis rejoiced to meet one another. Hearing the story how Rukmini was carried off by Sri Krishna, which was being sung at every place, the assembled princes and princesses felt greatly astonished. Great was the jubilation, O king, among the citizens in Dwaraka, at the sight of Sri Krishna, the spouse of Sri, the goddess of beauty and prosperity, united in wedlock with Rukmini, who was no other than the goddess Lakshmi. Thus ends the 54th discourse, forming part of the story of Rukmini's wedding, and the latter half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. And I think that's a pretty perfect place to stop, finish the whole cycle of the story of Rukmini's wedding. And the next story takes place years later, and it's a very different story. So we can start with that next time.
Wow, amazing sequence of stories today. Adventures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're getting into all the various adventures. We're coming up to a lot of adventures of Krishna that are less known. The abduction of Rukmini is a fairly well-known one, but generally his most famous stories are his youth in Vraja, and a lot of the upcoming stories are not that widely known. So it's interesting to read through this part.
Wow.
Thank you.
I was wondering what was the basis of the justification of Krishna and Rukmini's relationship to the extent that it had to be as dramatic as it did turn out to be? Like, I mean, I guess she's the Maha avatar of Lakshmi. So it's like, yeah, it's Dharma that they connected, but was there more than that? Was there a point where they calculated it more concretely in some way, shape, or form?
Well, it was part of serving the greater purpose of Krishna's avatarana, and I suppose also it was part of the purpose of Lakshmi's avatarana in this case, right. to set up the destruction of this proliferation of kings of demonic nature who were oppressors.
Oh, okay. So her family and the guys that Krishna took down in order to get her were not good guys.
Her father seems kind enough, but weak and manipulated by his son Rukmi, who is a cruel prince. But yeah, Rukmi is definitely. I mean, he cared only for an advantageous political marriage and was perfectly happy to marry off his daughter to someone she didn't marry off his sister, rather, to someone she didn't want to marry. And they all end up being allies of the kind of the forces of darkness, so to speak, in the Mahabharata. The Kauravas and their host, Shishupala was, and the Chedis were part of them. These are all abusive and tyrannical kings. And it's a major purpose of Krishna's avatarana to karmically set up the mass destruction of these sort of corrupt kshatriyas.
Wow.
And so the whole circumstance of the marriage of Rukmini was part of that setup.
Huh. Okay. Yeah. I mean, amazing.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Right. Yep. Thank you. There's always learning, right? I think, right, this is what we call is the Maya. It's all a divine play to
Yes.
learn the lesson. And even though they're born into the right family, good, but I was just talking to my husband this morning about that line of the ego, right, is so thin and slimy that one can just slip. And this is where all this divine play happens to kind of fix it. Yes. And if we read in between the line and if we remain focused, yes, it's all learning. And I think time after time into many literatures or any philosophies or any belief system, like you do see this kind of things, right? Like kind of divine plays.
Yeah.
Like in Mahabharata, right? Like when Bhishma, right, the grandfather, I think it comes later, got killed, or he actually asked to be killed by Arjun.
Yes.
I think, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So it's like it was a grandfather. It seemed to be the good guy, but actually he asked for his death. Yeah, on that the bows. Yeah.
Yes. Well, he understood that the Pandavas were in the right, but he was duty bound to fight for his king. So he knew that it was the course of dharma that he was going to die and lose that war.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
could it be like similar for this Rukmini's father, right? Like,
It could, yeah. I do think it's somewhat similar. There were signs reading between the lines that Rukmini's father offered the Madhuparka to Krishna, which you give to the bridegroom on the eve of the wedding. So he seemed to be kind of like, he didn't want to openly go against his son, who's sort of domineering, and openly go against his political allies. But he was sort of subtly signaling that he supports Krishna doing this and is pretty much aware of what's going to happen.
right.
But he was a somewhat
Like a passive.
passive and sort of a weak king, and that he wasn't willing to speak out against his domineering son, even on behalf of his daughter, who was being married off against her will. And he wasn't willing to speak up against his political allies who want this. He'll hope that Krishna does what he knows is the right thing, but he's not going to take the courage to do it himself or speak up for it. That's sort of the character of Bhishmaka.
Don't we have the same thing time after time, whether it's the old time or this time?
Yeah, no, it's
Right.
it's super understandable that he's not going to go against this huge, powerful political alliance who all clearly wants this thing just to stand up for his daughter, who, it's understandable, but he definitely wasn't a especially courageous king. Yeah.
I had one other question of earlier in the story today. How it went kind of quick about how Krishna and Balaram escaped the burning mountain.
Yep. Yeah, that did go by quick.
How did they, like, it was like, okay, it'll build up to it, and
They
they
just
ran to it, and then they were surrounded by fire, and then the next day they were back in
in Dwaraka. It just
town.
said that they jumped off the top and that nobody saw it. Yeah. So they found some height from the top of the mountain where they were able to just jump clear And that's all it told us. So I know that like I've seen in artistic depictions or sometimes like folk songs or folk plays will elaborate on these stories and refer to them jumping into a body of water. But that was even more detailed than was actually in the Bhagavatam. It just says that they jumped clear of it and nobody saw them and they snuck away. Yeah.
That's what.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys very much for coming. That
Thanks,
was really
Dave.
nice. Yeah.
I was just writing a little message.
Oh, well, yeah. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yeah.
How are you celebrating?
I don't know.